You're tuned in to RX Radio.
All right, guys, another episode of RX Radio. Welcome back. Special episode today. It's funny, this guy, Alec Blenis, been on my radar for 5 or 6 years now, and it was kind of interesting how Instagram brought us together. I think our first interaction may have been someone tagged me in him doing a weighted hip airplane, and I think they maybe thought that I would have taken it as some sort of joke or something, but went through his stuff after years prior, and I explained this in the episode. I'd gone through his website and read a bunch of his articles. Now they're a bit dated, but just to kind of give you a way this guy thinks, his articles back in 2020, go on his website and read them. They're about as pragmatic and pertinent then as they were today. But anyways, I started following this guy's training. I'm like, this guy's out of his fucking mind. And I brought him up on a podcast a few weeks back, and we were able to link through that. So huge shout out to everyone who kind of made that connection, and obviously thanks to Alec for coming on and offering some of his time. Super interesting conversation because I think it takes the science-based lifting and really puts it into focus. Because so Alec has a physics background from Georgia Tech, which we talk about, and you can tell by the way he thinks about things, sort of just the uncertainty and the precision that he goes about his training methods is really, really interesting. Because he gets into a little bit of his philosophy and how physics and his background in physics really helped shape his understanding of science at large, and how that understanding of science and the scientific method really are at the core of his training. But if you were to, Google search science-based lifting, you would likely not find yourself seeing the type of workouts that he does. But when you listen to his logic and reason, it's probably some of the most sound science that you're going to find. And I think it's a super interesting conversation. Awesome dude, hell of an athlete. If you guys aren't following Alec on Instagram, definitely do that. All the stuff is in the show notes. So again, huge thanks for Alec for coming on and sort of lending us his time. Really interesting, thoughtful, well thought out dude, athlete, coach. So if you're interested in anything he's doing, head on over to his socials. And Alec, thanks again, man. The things I wanted to start with is a quote. And I think this actually may have been the first time I come across any of your stuff. Before I found you on Instagram, I actually found your blog post years ago. And I'm gonna read this back to you because everyone likes
back in the day. Wow.
Everyone likes 5-year-old shit getting thrown back in their face. Although after our previous conversation, this probably still holds true. The human body is amazingly resilient and has outstanding capacity to get freakishly good at things without falling apart, and can survive substantial abuse and neglect. How did you end up at that as a thought process? That's a pretty evolved way to think about the human body, especially the abuse and neglect part.
Yeah, there's so many ways I've arrived at that, but I think if I had to pick one thing that kind of sums it up, it's just that despite most people that walk in a gym not having a fucking clue what they're doing, like the amount of stuff, you go to a commercial gym, you watch what people are doing, it's insane. Like, people have no concept of load management. People's technique is off the wall. Like, it's just crazy out there, right? But despite all of that, strength training is still overwhelmingly incredibly safe with like very low rates of injury. And if you a few basic load management principles with that, you can lift and get really good and really strong very, very safely compared to pretty much any other form of recreation. Like compared to running, compared to most sports, compared to even yoga, I think has a higher injury rate than like resistance training, right? And so just the fact that people like having no idea what they're doing, having poor lifestyle factors, poor sleep, high stress, they're still able to go in the gym and do random shit and get good at it. I'm like, I think we might be taking our jobs a little bit too seriously when it comes to like some of the crazy like injury prevention, bulletproofing promises. It's like, I don't know, man. I think humans are pretty resilient, and we just have to get out of the way sometimes, not be too stupid. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Do you remember the article that I quoted?
That was that my beginner's guide to program design or something like that?
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up specifically, because there's a background that you have that's very unique, and I think allows you to arrive at very logical conclusions like that. Like, yeah, we can do one of the things that I first noticed about biomechanics is I grew up in not a great neighborhood, and I watched a crackhead walk across the street. Guy must have been 100 pounds tops with a fridge on his back. And I'm like, oh, we're good. Like, we're good. Like, we're extra good. This guy he's an ant, essentially. That article, do you remember the header image on your website of that article?
The infinite staircase.
Yes, the Escher staircase.
Yeah.
And then that got my attention. That was when, like, okay, there's something to this. And I did a bit of digging. What is your educational background in?
So I originally went to school for physics. I think a large part of that was I didn't have a super clear direction of what I wanted to do with my life in terms of a career path. I was just always good at math and science, and I was super inquisitive and was like always asking how stuff worked, why stuff worked, why stuff was the way that it was. And I feel like when you start going down that line of thinking and you're like, well, why is that? And why is that? And why is that? The answer eventually boils down to some sort of basic physics principle. So it's like, I just want to understand things on as deep a level as I can. So then I got into physics, and 4 years of physics undergrad honestly just made me a lot more confused about how anything worked. Like, the more you get into it, the more you're just like, the fact that anything works at all is just absurd. Like, it's crazy. But yeah, that's kind of what got me started down that path. And I kind of fell into coaching by accident, which is a whole side story. But I've tried my best to retain that sort of like inquisitive nature, some degree of scientific skepticism, as I've gotten into the fitness world. And the more I've, questioned some of the like central beliefs that a lot of people have around fitness, the more I've realized that like a lot of it is just kind of like pulled out of thin air, like assumptions layered on top of assumptions on top of assumptions. And it reminded me a lot of like Physics 101, where you're solving a problem and the problem will be like, it's like a classic physics meme. It's like, imagine a penguin is a cylinder, and you make this assumption that a penguin is a cylinder so you can solve some sort of heat dissipation problem. But then like, that a penguin is not actually a cylinder. You're like making a ton of assumptions about surface area to volume and all these sorts of things with those assumptions. And sometimes those assumptions are not very significant and they don't change the end result by a whole lot. But then other times you're solving a problem in Physics 101. It's like, ignore friction, ignore air resistance, ignore this. And you have to ignore like 20 different things to be able to even solve the problem. And then your like simplified solution is nowhere close to like what's actually happening in the real world. And I think that biomechanics is a great example of that. When you start modeling forces acting on a joint, so you can try to figure out what's going on, there's so many things that you have to ignore that like a lot of the things and conclusions that we arrive at from like basic biomechanical models, when you compare it to like just actual like force plate data, for example, or real world movement, there's such a disconnect. And so it drives me nuts when people like just get hung up on their simplistic biomechanical models. I'm like, do you ever take Physics 101 and like see the difference between like, assumptions that you have to make to solve a problem and like the actual real world? It's just staggering. And I think a lot of people miss that.
Well, it's funny because like even in complex biomechanical models, like whenever I think of classic, almost computational biomechanics, like Major League Baseball, the amount of money that every team spends on biomechanical engineering. And when you run the math on the ulnar collateral ligament, it's a mystery. It's a mystery in principle why every pitcher at 94 miles per hour and over doesn't tear their UCL. Because according to even a complex biomechanical model, so there's a difference right away between an answer in principle and an answer in practice, because guys are throwing like 101, 102, and their UCLs are holding on. In your physics background, when did you start to think when did you start to think laterally, outside of being inquisitive, which sounds like it kind of predates and set the path for you going down physics or down the physics educational rabbit hole? When did you start to like think laterally within, or what principles in physics where you're like, oh, I can carry this over and actually I'm probably not as at risk? Or how has your training been influenced by your academic background, other than just being inquisitive and being like, well, I'm gonna try it?
Oh man, that's a tough question. One experience I had in physics was it was this course called Advanced Lab, and basically the premise of the course was recreating some of the like most famous physics experiments of all time, with modern technology, mind you. So like we're recreating experiments that people did to like prove the existence of gravity, or prove that the Earth was round, or the circumference of the Earth, and this kind of stuff. Redoing experiments that were done hundreds of years ago, with the instruction manual of like how to do it, with modern high precision instruments, with a professor telling us how to do it, and still like I was not able to like get as accurate of results as these people like hundreds of years ago. With like, it's just mind blowing, like the level of precision, and the detail that is required, just how painstakingly difficult high quality research really is when it comes to some of that kind of stuff. And it really gave me an appreciation for like, you can't just, every little assumption, every little error, every little mistake just compounds, and looking at some of the like research coming out of exercise science labs, the amount of error and the amount of assumption compared to even a lot of the stuff that we were doing in the physics lab is crazy. Like the quality of the science, not to discount the work that a lot of those people are doing, but to make like to take really, really strong conclusions away from some of that kind of stuff. Seeing is like, as a as a physics student at like a prestigious university with instructor guidance, I like could barely figure out the circumference of the Earth, like, and then people are walking away from these exercise science studies with like, nope, this is how you do it based on this thing with like insane error bars. I'm like, I don't know, you guys. I think there's a lot that we don't know, and I think we need to be a lot more willing to just like go out and get the real world data too, that's available to us through training. So hopefully that makes sense of just like realizing that the exercise science quality, well, there's a lot of cool stuff to come out of it. It's certainly not as good as I think a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about like the recency effect and how like if something new, therefore it must be better. And then you're going back in time hundreds of years and like finding the volume of object by submersing it in water or something like that. And you're just like, I can't do this. What you do? You went to Georgia, right?
Georgia Tech.
Yeah. And if you can't sort it out there, like maybe progress isn't linear. Maybe the latest study isn't the best study. It's just, it's just another dumb study done with like just conclusions that we can't actually use.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great, older studies, and people criticize it and they'll be like, that study's from 1977 or whatever. It's like, yeah, they were doing some decent stuff back then too. And today we have such a like publisher perish culture, and now with like especially better computational methods, it's really easy just to like pull some like Mendelian randomization thing out of your ass and put it out there, and it's like possibly meaningless. And so there's a ton of like shit papers out there too, and so people just go digging for like the most recent meta-analysis, for example, without realizing that it's probably pulling from all the like 1970s papers that they're criticizing anyway. Like, I don't know. I don't think people have a very good understanding of like how research actually takes place, how meta-analyses are performed, like where the sources of error are. There's so many issues that I think we run into in the like evidence-based space. And I never want people to think that, science doesn't matter or that research doesn't matter. But especially in a field like exercise science, I think you have to take the practical stuff and like anecdote and real world coaching experience and results from real athletes and like best practices emerging from teams and stuff like that. You have to take that stuff relatively seriously as well, and not get hung up on this paper said this, because it's just not like that rigorous or consistent of a field compared to so many others.
So I'm curious how what's been your training arc since the beginning? Because if I hear the word Mendelian randomization, I'm thinking of like, I know how this guy trains. Like if someone says that to me and they start talking about like P values or P scores or P, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I know. And then I watch you train. I'm like, wait a minute, what the fuck? This is nowhere near like anyone who knows anything or proclaims to know anything about research. Nowadays, they all seem to be training a particular way, and I don't even want to say you're the antithesis to the way that they train. You're the antichrist to the way that they train. Your training is fucking insane, dude. So I'm curious, like, I mean, for me, it was all bodybuilding, and then I got into powerlifting. It was like sport, bodybuilding, powerlifting, and now I just don't want to like not be in pain from playing the sport, the bodybuilding, and the powerlifting. But I'm curious, like, at what age did you start training? What was your training style, and like, how has it evolved to like whatever the fuck I'm seeing now? Your training scares me.
I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from a guy like you. I think like a lot of dudes in their 30s, like me, I grew up on, T Nation articles and that sort of thing. I learned, 21s, bicep curls in the high school weight room with the football team. I grew up emulating a lot of what I saw my older brother doing, which is like classic, bodybuilding stuff. Started going to a CrossFit gym in high school as well, so I had some exposure to that side too. But I was also the kind of kid who I wasn't just like a meathead. I didn't just play football, largely because I was just not that good at any one sport. I was pretty young for my grade. I was on the smaller side, so I just kind of bounced around. I did like a little bit of all the sports. I did football, I did baseball, I did wrestling, I did tennis, cross country, track and field. I was a pole vaulter. So I did a little bit of all of those things. And I think that was great in hindsight because I got exposure to just a ton of different training ideas, and, trained with a lot of different teams and a lot of different coaches. And even then, like, there was a lot of, inconsistencies in things that like one coach would say that didn't make sense with something another coach had said. And so I started to understand pretty early on that, context is important and depends on what you're training for and all of that kind of stuff. But once I started really taking training seriously, I was probably 15, 16 years old. And I did make the mistake at that time, like I'm sure so many people do, if I saw, PhD after somebody's name, or if I saw someone had written a book, or someone had a tremendous following of some kind, I just assumed they knew what the fuck they were talking about. And like, instant like kind of appeal to authority, like, oh, they have a PhD, I'm going to believe every word that they say without thinking about it. I naively thought that I could just trust every expert in the field. And so I started just like reading books and just following programs from books. And like, it is good enough for a book. It's good enough for me. And so that's kind of how I started. One of the first programs I followed was from a book called New Rules for Lifting for Men, something like that. It was actually a pretty good first exposure to lifting because it was all about just like squat, hinge, push, pull, like basic movement patterns, fairly heavy load, some tempo stuff. There's like a lot of 3-1-3 tempo stuff in that. So very, very bodybuilding influence. And then around that time, 17, 18 years old, I was getting progressively more into distance running because it was kind of the one sport that I kind of stood out in above the rest. I started to be pretty good at it. And so then I started, basically transitioning from kind of the bodybuilding stuff from books and magazines and T Nation articles. I transitioned from that to like running specific strength training, which is an entire hellscape of its own. The amount of the quality of information in like the run specific strength world is crazy. But basically I fell into this trap of like hyper specificity where it was all single leg training. It was all high rep training. It was just trying to become like a unilateral muscular endurance monster kind of thing. And so I kind of fell into that for a bit. And one of the first like series progressions I ran for a long time, in pursuit of muscular endurance was 3x30 squats, which you can imagine how gross 3x30 squats is. Sorry, my internet cut there for a second. You can imagine how gross 3x30 squats is. But I remember I was in the college weight room I was like, I'm just going to start at 135, 3 sets of 30, see how it goes. And every week I don't die, I'm just going to add like 5 pounds. And I got all the way up to 3 by 30 with like 245 as like a 140 pound runner. So definitely ended up getting a lot stronger than most people that pursue, like run specific strength training. But I think it was the combination of like the background of ego lifting with the football team and then pursuing like muscular endurance kind of stuff in pursuit of run specific strength, and just like understanding progressive overload of like, I'm just going to add more weight to the bar. I'm just going to add more weight to the bar. And I guess it's becoming a long story, but long story short, I did all of that and realized that it really wasn't helping with my running. It was just making me tired. And so around that time, I just started thinking to myself a little bit more. I'm like, maybe these people don't have it figured out, And so my training became a lot more experimental. I started, trying to learn from more different people and like emerging coaches in the industry versus just like the famous T Nation articles and that kind of thing. Started experimenting, dabbled in a couple different sports, tried a little bit of powerlifting, a little bit of CrossFit, a little bit of Olympic weightlifting, and now kind of completing the training arc, the last, 8 to 10 years or so of training, has really been heavily leaning into just like fuck around, find out, and see what works for me. And now I would say I lean more towards, higher intensity, lower to moderate volumes. I probably am on the higher side in terms of variation and novelty, but not insane. I like a lot of heavy single leg stuff, and I don't like get emotionally attached to specific exercises. Like my barbell bench press, for example, I think it's a great exercise, but it's just as great as everything else. So I'll load up a program like today. I did Zercher split squats. I did dumbbell bench. I did like a half kneeling pull down. Did some sumo deadlifts. So like a little bit of everything, I'll have some of the science-based stuff, like the optimal like angled cable pull down. I think actually feels really good. But then also some like kind of funkier like Zercher hold stuff. Cause I just kind of experiment with all. I'm like, yeah, I like this. I don't like this. And so my training is kind of a hodgepodge of like, 6 different sports put together. And it works great for me. Sorry for talking your ear off there, but hopefully that all made sense.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break from today's episode and talk about Prescript Level 1. PSL 1 course is a fully accredited continuing education course that focuses on applied biomechanics and functional anatomy, with CEUs offered from NASM, NSCA, American Council for Exercise, but if you're a chiropractor as well, it's also accredited through the NBCE, National Board of Chiropractic Examiners. So if you're looking to add problem-solving solutions to your toolbox and want to learn more about applied biomechanics and functional anatomy, the PSL1 course is for you. Registration is currently live at www.pre-script.com/PSL1. All right, back to the show.
Well, I mean, you have a lot to atone for. One, you glossed over a few things that I think are important. Today's most recent offense, the one, you're able to do the splits, which is a pretty impressive feat of anyone who lifts the amount of weight that you lift. You did the splits into a quad extension ankle cuff cable stack variation. That has to be what, like, you're not finding that on the internet. Is that an old Russian training manual? Like, how do you come up with these ways to torture yourself?
I think part of it is just a willingness to explore and like be somewhat playful with training. I think people take certain things too seriously in terms of not being willing to deviate from the program and that kind of stuff. But like we started the conversation with, like, the human body has a tremendous capacity to handle some abuse and neglect. I think within reason. If you're pretty consistent and pretty smart with the majority of your training, and you're following a basic, simple, linear progression or auto-regulation, whatever, and you have an exercise or two where you're like, I'm going to, fuck around and try out this new accessory today, or just kind of play around with, do some random stuff for, a couple sets of quads. Like, you can tolerate a little bit of that, variability in your training. And I think if you if you lean into that, eventually you'll find something cool. You'll find something nice. You might make a couple of mistakes and be like, nah, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. But then you'll stumble across some cool stuff. And, this cable leg extension that you're talking about, I think it's funny because I've gotten mixed reviews, mixed responses when people see me doing that. And one of the most interesting things that I heard from that was from a personal trainer who they were dealing with a client who had like severe knee pain. I think they had some sort of like, I don't know if it was a meniscus issue or what, but basically they got a lot of pain doing traditional leg extensions. And even though off the top of your head, like it probably doesn't sound like a great idea if a regular leg extension doesn't feel good to throw someone into this like extreme range of motion leg extension. But it seemed that like that half of the movement, like the more lengthened half with that kind of resistance profile, for whatever reason, ended up feeling really good for this person who previously was unable to do leg extensions at all. And I think that, and it kind of surprised me even, but it just kind of reiterated that like, general movement pattern is not off limits. This person that thought they couldn't do leg extensions, they were able to finally do the movement just by trying out this new variation, even if, at first glance, it seems like it might not be a good idea. So yeah, it just kind of reaffirmed for me, like, keep playing around. You're going to find something cool that some people are going to hate and some people are going to love. But that's what training is all about. It's just like explore, find the things you love, and then run them into the ground.
So I want to linger on that last point because you seem to have an interesting relationship with pain. It's just as a hard stop. Like one of the first experiments, and I'm not sure if you were to spearhead it or if you were kind of adopting it, but one of the things when I started following you on Instagram years ago, and I don't know if you still do this, but your deliberate heat exposure training was some of the more, like you'd be wearing hoodies and you would just be like, it'd be 1,000 degrees and you're like, yeah, you're going to get hot when you train. So why don't you guys get used to being really hot all the time? Like, what is the most painful workout you've done? And can you talk a little bit about that particular type of training?
Yeah. So, I mean, heat training has been, kind of a staple in the endurance world for a while, especially if you're preparing for warm weather competition. Like, basically, it's just an example in specificity. Like, if you're going to race hot, you got to train hot. Some people call heat training poor man's altitude because there's some cross adaptations and like some of the mechanisms behind altitude and heat adaptation are somewhat similar. So it's been pretty popular for a while. Thanks to a couple like bigger names in the endurance world, it's making a bit of a resurgence or gaining some popularity with people now exploring it to improve even cool weather performance. It's debatable. The jury's still out. It definitely, training hot improves hot weather performance. It's maybe neutral for cool weather performance, maybe beneficial. But this is an area actually where, I look at some of the research on it, and the research generally arrives at the conclusion that heat training is just specificity and that it's neutral for cool weather. But when I look at how the studies are actually done, I see areas for improvement, and I'm like, well, the way you did it, I think you actually, ended up sacrificing training quality a little bit. And there's this like give and take with a lot of things, like with heat training, where you're getting hot, but then you have to slow down. And so now you're training at slower paces to get the heat exposure. And so there's a trade-off between specificity and quality. And you can arrange a program if you're smart about it, and you can, make some changes so that you keep the quality as high as possible while still getting the heat exposure. And so a lot of the protocols I look at in the literature, I'm like, well, I think that could have actually been done a little bit better. And so if this program that is probably suboptimal came out, showing that it's just as good or neutral for cool weather performance, maybe if we make some further tweaks and optimize it, it might actually be better. So that's something I look at. I'm like, well, I'm going to try it. I'm going to experiment. What do I have to lose kind of thing? And so that's kind of how I get into some of that kind of stuff. I look at maybe some gaps in the literature, things that I think I could do better than the researchers did, see if I can get even better results than they did. And so that's kind of how I approached heat training. But I'll probably piss off a lot of lifters when I say this, but as someone who does like endurance sports and, marathons, ultra marathons, I do long runs on the treadmill. Like I'll run 20 miles on the treadmill, no problem. lifting is just not that difficult. Like it's intense. It's intense. Like for those few seconds, you know, you got to like hype yourself up. But like in terms of the actual, like, you know, just the mental fortitude and like mental endurance, you know, to get through a gym session versus a long run, like it don't even come close. So I always laugh when people are like in the gym fighting their demons or whatever. I'm like, dude, it's not, it's not that serious.
Marathon runners, ultras, and then mid distance are some of the most sick people I've ever met in the head.
Yeah, it's all kind of sick in their own way, but I'd say all of those things are more challenging than anything you'll do in the gym. Okay. Even like 20 rep squats and stuff, like whatever, it's not that bad. But like swimmers just like staring at the black line in the pool for hours, or you know, doing 800 meter repeats in the track, like all that stuff is so much worse. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I was at Stanford when Katie Ledecky was there, and man, where you have to go, like and that's why I'm so curious about pain, because one of the things that's always interests me, and I'm not sure if you've ever done this research on yourself, but I'd fucking pay to have it done on you, is blood lactate thresholds.
Oh yeah.
Like, I don't know, have you ever looked at any of that data on yourself?
I've done a lot of like gas exchange tests, like VO2 max and that kind of stuff, and kind of estimated, you know, thresholds based off of the like respiratory quotient, but I've never actually done the blood lactate itself. I've been thinking about it though. It'd be fun.
When you're down in Texas, because what I'm curious is, it seems like with the athletes that I've tested this on, there's a divide of like people who can buffer really quickly and people who can just endure. Like people who are up in like, you know, the high teens into the low 20s. I'm like, how are you not throwing up? And then people who are doing these like repeated strenuous high intensity bouts that are like sub 10. And you're like, oh, you're actually not in pain. You're chilling. Like you don't even feel it because your body is just able to turn it over so quickly. I'm
the kind of guy, and this applies to like my endurance stuff and my strength stuff, of like, if I sit just below a certain threshold, like I can hang out there all day. And then as soon as I cross over this line, it's like, I just burn to a crisp, like in a second. But like, even in the gym, it's like that. Like, you know, looking at 1RM charts and stuff like that, they'll be pretty accurate for me for like, you know, 5RM predicts 1RM pretty accurately. And then, you know, 8RM and so on. But then like I'll use like 80% for like a set of 20. And people are like, that doesn't make sense. Like your 1RM should be higher. I'm like, no, it's not. I just, like I did double body weight, back squat for a set of 20, last year. That's pretty standard. Like that's not a super challenging set for me. But when I was in like some of my best endurance shape, I think I back squatted 335 for 20 and could like barely hit 405 for a single, you know? So like just like a crazy strength curve, you know?
Well, I mean, at a certain point, I don't know how much credence I put into this, but you talked early days, like T-Nation articles and all that. When around the same time, I would assume Poliquin was really going on about fiber type training. And I wonder if there's not something there, like, you know, like the type 2A or type 2B and type X and glycolytic and alactic. I wonder if just like your system's got to be optimized for something. So there's got to be some sort of depreciating return when you get under a bar that's like close to 1 RM.
Yeah, I used to train that way. I used to do a lot of like high rep stuff because I thought it was the way to go for endurance sports. And then I realized that doesn't actually make sense, and that I should use the gym to like get the things I'm not getting out of my endurance training. You know, like I don't need to go to the gym and make it more endurance training. And so I thought that would shift, you know, and I haven't really done much high rep work at all in years. But still I get under the bar and you want a set of 20, I'm the go. I did bring it back briefly. I wanted to hit 5 plates in the pendulum squat for a set of 20. I just had this like arbitrary goal in my head. So I built up to 20 reps, 5 plates in the pendulum squat. I'm like, I want to see what I can hit for a single. And with this, for a single, I did like 5 plates plus 15. And that was like my single. But I did 5.
That's
yeah,
crazy.
It's just disgusting. Yeah.
I don't necessarily call this goal arbitrary because I think at one point, if I'm not mistaken, it was the best time in the world, and it still may be. Can you explain to me the Murph situation? Because you
Yeah,
glassed over. You said CrossFit in a list of things. Like, yeah, I got into this and this. I'm like, wait, on one of those things, you actually set a world record. So I don't know if you just like casually got into it.
yeah. I don't spend a lot of time talking about CrossFit because it's not like I'm not that good at it. Broadly speaking, there's just a few workouts. If it has like a lot of gymnastics in it, for example, I'm really good at gymnastics movements and muscle ups and that kind of stuff. Handstand push-ups, like I just crush all that kind of stuff. And so Murph is a workout that I always loved. Like every time it would come up in CrossFit every year, I would always get excited. I used to do Cindy, which is like kind of similar to Murph. It's just the bodyweight stuff. So it's the push-ups, the pull-ups, and the squats as like an AMRAP. For a while, I would do Cindy like once a week because I just loved the workout. I thought it was fun. So I have a lot of experience with that kind of workout and that workout style in general. But the Murph 20-pound weight vest for a mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, another mile run. And then the record format is to do it unpartitioned. So whereas a lot of people will do like 20 rounds of 5, 10, 15 of those movements, the record is just 100 straight through, 200, 300, and so on. And so actually a friend of mine, Hunter McIntyre, some people on the podcast might be familiar with him. Yeah. He had the record before I did. And Hunter and I go way back. We've competed since I was a teenager. And it's funny because I've raced with Hunter a lot. And I've come close to him in races. I've like finished right behind him at races, but I've like never beaten him at anything in my life. And so when I saw him set the Murph record, I was like, oh, that's cool. And I just kind of set that as like this time in my head for the next time I did it, with the gym. So I went into class like on Memorial Day. I was like, all right, Hunter did it in like 34 minutes. So I'm gonna like kind of pace, see how close I can get to that. And like just in class, I beat his time. I'm like, well, that's weird. Like, that's crazy. Maybe I should try this again. So I like called up some people to formalize a record attempt, did it again a couple weeks later and beat his record by 2 minutes. And so that record, 32:41 for the weighted unpartitioned Murph, still stands after a couple of years.
Tell me you dropped the line, there's a new sheriff in town. Tell me you at least capitalize on that opportunity. If you haven't, text him right now.
Yeah. Well, we trained together last week. He decided he wants to try to take the record back from me, and I'm like, not so fast kind of thing. So we did a Murph workout together last week, and I think we're actually going to go head to head and say like, we're both going to try to beat it, and one of us will get the new record, hopefully.
That would be unreal. Because, I mean, back to the conversation around pain. At what point are you in one? Like, it sounds like the mile run with the vest for you is like relatively light work. But if you're going at a clip trying to break a record, like when are you hurting? Like, when do you go like, all right, this is fortitude from here on out? Or are you conditioned so well for a task like that you're like, all right, it doesn't really hit the sides?
Murph specifically is a weird one because the movements are all unpartitioned. You're doing the 100 straight through and so on. You have to walk like a really fine line with that muscle fatigue. Whereas if you push just a little bit too deep into the red zone, it's just impossible to come back from. So like a muscular endurance kind of thing like that, like trying to get through 200 push-ups without flaming out, you have to be really, really careful. So I did it as a very high volume of small sets. When I set the record, I set a timer and I did 5 push-ups every 12 seconds. So it's literally just like quick 5, lay on the ground a second, take a breath, quick 5, lay on the ground a second, take a breath, keeping 5 reps every 12 seconds. And like in training, I had practiced it. And like, what if I do 5 reps every 10 seconds? And it's like, get through half of it and then you're just done. Like there's such a fine line you walk there. And so through the actual workout, it's like not that it doesn't feel that bad, right? You're like, oh, this is easy. I could probably go a little bit faster. But then you try to go a little bit faster and then you're just destroyed immediately, So that's kind of how that workout goes until kind of the end. Like once you get to the squats in the final mile, you just kind of dig into the pain cave a little bit and get it done. But the rest of it's like a very strategic workout.
How do you manage your nutrition around all your
exploits. I don't know another word. I mean, we could call it training, but then that negates what everyone else in the world does. So we're just going to call it exploits. Like, what is? I mean, if you're that in tune with your outputs, and you go, hey, 2 seconds per 5 rep interval is going to put me over. How do you feed that machine?
I piss a lot of people off with the nutrition stuff, because my hot take is that once you're doing some pretty basic stuff, like if I'm hitting my macros, I'm getting enough carbs, I'm getting enough fiber, I'm eating some fruits and vegetables each day, like I don't really think about it much more beyond that. I don't know. I think people get so obsessed with nutrition, and they're like, well, getting too much omega-6, or, seed oils this, or artificial dyes this, and super clean, like I got to balance this and that and the other. And I'm like, I don't know. I think you reach a point of diminishing returns more quickly with nutrition. I don't want to discount that the basics matter and that there's some level of optimization. But I think there's this there's this trend where people want to credit nutrition more than it deserves. I saw a video, I don't want to throw shit at this particular individual, but a guy who is pretty well known for issues with steroid abuse. And he was in an interview, and the interviewer was like, what's your secret? And he's like, it's all about nutrition. And I'm like, dude, okay. Okay. And again, not to say nutrition doesn't matter, but I don't know. I feel like so many athletes out there are trying to hide some sort of secret, and they're like, the secret is, my super good diet. I'm like, no, it's fucking not. There's no way. Just do the basics. I eat enough protein, I eat enough carbs, I eat some fruits and veggies, and I call it good, Main thing that is challenging for me is I find higher training loads, higher training stresses, especially on the endurance side, can be an appetite suppressant for me. So I'll come back from a long run out in the heat, and ironically, the last thing I want to do is eat. I just want to drink fluids, and not eat for a couple hours. So trying to find ways to still get plenty of calories in, even when I don't really feel like it. That can be a little bit tricky. I'd say if there is a secret, it's kind of that. Just getting some more liquid calories, easy carb sources, that kind of stuff.
Now, how do you manage, I think this is sort of the question that everyone kind of has in their mind going into this podcast is, with your training, how do you manage the varying stimulus, I'm not going to use the H word, but from a nuts and bolts perspective, what are your guiding principles in, this contemporaneous, these contemporaneous training goals that tend to, in most circles, run in contradiction to one another?
Yeah, so trying to do, strength, endurance, whatever, concurrently is challenging, but I don't think I think people overcomplicate it. I think in any sport, training interferes with training. If you train hard one day, training hard the next day is going to be difficult. You got to manage fatigue no matter what you're doing. So I think the only difference is when you're combining different modalities, when you're managing strength and cardio, there's elements of overlapping fatigue that you have to be more careful of. But then you can also be tired in one way and still push hard in another. And so recognizing where certain workouts might get in each other's way a little bit versus where it's oh, my legs are sore, but I can still do an easy bike ride and still get some aerobic volume in. Just understanding some of those basics, I think is sufficient for most of it. There are some big picture guiding principles of certain workouts that I find are best to kind of prioritize in the schedule or set up on their own, really, really glycogen depleting endurance sessions. So longer, higher intensity tempo stuff. I try to usually prioritize schedule-wise a little bit more. Whereas short and fast intervals, yes, they're intense, but the volume is low enough that I'm usually not depleting a ton of glycogen. Likewise, longer, easier runs, the volume is high, but the intensity is low. It's some of that middle ground, longer threshold stuff that's really depleting. And so I want to go into it a little more fresh, a little more carbed up. Probably not as sore or fatigued from lifting, for example. But a lot of it is just consistency, I think, trumps optimization in some sense, in that you can arrange a schedule. You can do things with your concurrent program design where you might have something about it that's not optimal. Like you can't optimize everything. Optimizing for one variable is going to come at the expense of another. But that thing that's not perfect in your program, if you just keep running it, like you're going to get used to it. Just like, repeated bout effect, right? Like the first couple times you do some novel eccentric exercise, you're going to be really fucking sore. But like keep doing it for 3 months and you're not going to be, And I think the same thing applies to a lot of concurrent training stuff. If people are like, oh, it's hard for me to run after, leg day. It's like, okay, do it 40 more times and it's probably going to be okay. So I come back to that a lot of just like, sometimes you just have to pick something because you're not going to be able to make everything perfect and then just kind of run it for a while. And, after a couple months, maybe you try something new, something else is suboptimal about that setup, but then run it into the ground, get used to it and kind of figure it out as you go.
Are there any like bright lines on the interference effect conversation of like are there any rules that you're like, yeah, that run it into the ground works, except, I mean, it almost sounds like you adopt sort of like a pseudo Charlie Francis high-low model of like, yeah, a hard run and a hard lift day after day is probably not going to fly, but anything within that paradigm is good? Or do you take into consideration, what are most people bang on about? Like axial loading, neurological fatigue, like where does interference really rear its head in your world? That is there any way where it pops up and you just can't snuff it out with exposure?
I think it largely depends on like what your individual strengths and weaknesses are. Of like, if there's something you're already really good at, it just takes a different level of exposure and stimulus to like keep improving at something at which you're already quite proficient. Whereas if you're a beginner, working on a new skill, or like you're a big beginner with cardio, right? Like if you've never done much cardio in your life, you don't have to be at 100% like training readiness to still get a really good stimulus and really good adaptation from it. Whereas if you're a competitive miler who's trying to shave their mile time from like 4:20 to 4:15, like you're going to need to be pretty fresh going into some of those speed sessions to like run with the quality and the efficiency to like make that little bit of incremental progress. So I think a lot of it is really context dependent of like understanding what do you, the individual, need to prioritize in your schedule and in your system. And that can vary from athlete to athlete, as opposed to there being these hard and fast rules of like, you always do this session before this session, and you always take this many easy days after this kind of session. It's like, what do you need to prioritize? What does your recovery timeline look like for these different types of sessions? And so I think two, optimal programs for two different people could prioritize, quite different elements. If I was going to say any really big picture things, I'd say just trying to avoid like really high outputs and like high skill work while really fatigued. So like maybe don't do a super long run and then go and try to like max out your snatch. Like that is like the exact opposite of what makes the most sense. But I think as long as you're avoiding that sort of like glaringly obvious mistake, a lot of it can be kind of pushed through with exposure, or you just kind of fuck around and find out and see, what do you need to prioritize to keep moving the needle forward.
And that can get pretty dicey pretty quick.
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
So I think we've kind of been through this in the past with like some CrossFit programming stuff and some issues that I think occurred with like big box programming and that kind of stuff. And we're seeing it again with HYROX now and like HYROX classes and that kind of stuff, where I think people get really excited about something and then they over-index specificity. And now like every workout is this like all-out kind of Metcon or HYROX simulation or something like that. And you don't have enough people doing still like the basic S&C. Like we had CrossFitters who like they weren't doing enough just like heavy basic lifting and like basic Olympic weightlifting and like bringing up their max strength and stuff to support their Metcon performance, or they weren't doing any like standard like lower intensity sustained conditioning. And I think, in CrossFit, for example, I think we see more of that now, like more strength and conditioning with, metcon and specificity stuff stacked on top of it. And I think we got to see the same thing happen with HYROX, where it's like you should still be lifting heavy and doing basic strength work. You can still do basic, like go just run 10 miles at an easy pace kind of thing. Like not every workout needs to be this like crazy, like, multimodal thing with sled pushes and sled pulls. Like that's an element of it, but it doesn't have to be the whole thing. That'd be my main advice. Is like have fun. I'm glad that people are fired up and have like a new cool thing to train for. Just like remember basic S&C principles and like basic general training too, and then layer the specificity on top of it in a way that's sustainable for a longer period of time, so you don't end up doing 4-6 months of HYROX training and then you're like burnt to a crisp and you never want to do it again.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, I actually did one. I did one of their first events like years ago, when they were kind of first coming on the scene, and it was fun. I'm amazed that people like it as much as they do because it's like kind of the same repeated indoor format. I was like, I don't really need to do the same workout over and over again kind of thing, but it was cool. I don't think it doesn't play to my strengths as well. As like a smaller, shorter guy, a lot of the erg work, sled work, wall balls are a little bit more challenging. The running is great. Some of the bodyweight stuff is great. I think if it played to my strengths a little bit more, I'd probably force myself to do it, but it's all right.
The last point I kind of wanted to shift to, and this is almost nothing to do with training, is you seem to have a sort of like an unwavering positivity, and I could be misreading this, but you tend to, I mean, even that right there, like there's a lot of people who aren't necessarily even in your position with your physical ability that are quick to denounce the HYROX or the CrossFit, right? Like there's sort of like a high horse of social media success where people can start to look down their nose and browbeat. You tend to be pretty like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like normal, which maybe is quite the accolade. But like how, like I've seen social media cook people's heads, and like for example, the split quad extension you did today. I know people on a first name basis, I could call them, that if they put up something on Instagram that got a lot of attention and it was talked about on a podcast later that day, that's all they would do for like the next X number of times. But you seem to kind of have this like take it or leave it, come as you are type. How do you manage the social media sphere with doing things that are so like, holy shit, dude, like you're wearing a fucking sauna suit, you've been on the treadmill for 7 hours, like what the fuck? How have you navigated like the social media space as like an adjunct to your business, but also a repository of your training? Like how, is there any forethought or metacognition around that?
Oh yeah. I mean, for me, I think it's all about like trying to play the long game of like, I actually want to enjoy what I do for a living. Like I don't want to force myself into some box, just to like get, clicks or attention that day. Cause like, yeah, it's cool, for a little while. And then you fall into this rabbit hole of like trying to win the internet, or I see it all the time. People like, there'll be an exercise they do really well, or they'll have like a video go viral, and then like they end up trying to repeat that over and over again, and they'll post the same thing, 20 times. And like, that just sounds like it sucks. Like, I just want to go to the gym and train and enjoy life, and like whatever content I'm able to pull out of that, I'll try to find some ways to make it educational and entertaining, but like I don't want to live some sort of fake life or train in a way that's not genuine to me and I don't enjoy, because like the whole point of social media and having a business and all that kind of stuff is to be able to live the life I want to live. And so if I'm living a different life to have that success, I've like got the whole thing backwards in the first place, So yeah, that has never made a lot of sense to me. But I think one of the reasons that we see so much like arguing, and like you said, just kind of like looking down at people who are doing things differently, is just people get so wrapped up in their sport. Like they coach, like all of their athletes are powerlifters and they compete in powerlifting and they live and breathe powerlifting. That's all they've done for 20 years. And so they just have like this hard time understanding anybody else, and they see someone doing something a little bit different, and they look down at it. I think we need people with more exposure to more ideas, and that's one of the things I think is really cool about the kind of hybrid and current space is you do have people coming in from more walks of life, and like, you have people coming from more of an endurance background, you have people from a CrossFit background, you have, bodybuilders and strength athletes who are like now taking their cardio health seriously, and you have all these people kind of converging on whether it's HYROX or something else. And I think that's been really cool and really good for the fitness space. And so when I see people like poke fun at it, I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like hybrid rock stars is like the dumbest shit you've ever heard in your life, right? But also it's like, come on, dude. Like, why do you have to be such a buzzkill? Like, the majority of people in the world and the US especially are not even meeting physical activity guidelines. So like when you have like big name fitness people like making fun of people doing something that's legitimately good for them and fun and social, it's like, I don't know what like crawled up your butt, dude, but like just relax a bit.
All right. Well, don't go losing that good Midwestern spirit when you go down to Texas. Don't let that little state, don't let that little pocket of Austin, California, Texas ruin you, man. We'll have to
Yeah.
swing by and make sure that you don't lose that small town look and feel.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I feel like the Midwest has been fun for me. I'm not actually originally from here. I've been living in Minneapolis for 8 years. I'm originally from Atlanta, born and raised at Atlanta.
Geez.
Yeah, but I think, people, they know I live in Minneapolis now, and I think the vibe and the culture and stuff of Minneapolis fits me pretty well. So I'll try my best to bring that down to Texas.
Well, they need it, man, especially down there in Austin. But no, there's all joking aside, there's some good people, and no, I appreciate you coming on and sharing a bit of wisdom. For those, I realized halfway through that I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to record an intro because I just started asking you a shit ton of questions out of the gate. But I'll definitely do that, and I'll sing your praises in the intro. But for those looking to get in touch with you, I mean, I think you're in kind of when we lined this up, I went back through and I read a bunch of your articles. And I started with the one back in 2020, the programming one we talked about. I think finding your website and the stuff you have on there, if you guys are into like actually reading and learning stuff, super interesting takes that elaborate a little bit more. But for those who are looking to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, find me on Instagram at Alec Blenis. Making a push on YouTube right now as well. I got some long form content coming out this month. You're putting the pressure on me to get back on my website and like write some long form stuff there. The pressure's on now because I haven't written anything there in years. But yeah, maybe check that out if I do decide to drop something new. I do just want to say I am shocked that we got through an hour of conversation and did not talk about hip airplanes at all. A little disappointed, but it's okay.
You're good at them. I'm good at them. I think I'll tell you what, when you and Hunter chase down the world record for Murph and you want another challenge on the world record for hip airplane, come up north, do some cold exposure training, and I feel like you and I could go head to head, pound for pound, hip airplane of the world. So, I'm just saying, the challenge is always there.
I would gladly accept. I think it'd be a fun time. That's like my biggest beef is people taking exercises that I actually really like and then just like underloading the shit out of them, and I'm like, no. That's not what I meant,
yeah, that's funny. Well, you know what? It's cold down here. We'll do Terry Black's. We'll do an eating contest at Terry Black's, then we'll do a loaded hip airplane contest.
All right, man. We'll make it a date then. Thanks for having me on. That was fun.
Man. Thanks so much, bro.